Is your family tree a mystery? Are you fascinated by genealogy? Well, hip hip hooray, let's talk DNA with Julie.
The truth is in your genes.
In CutOff Genes.
Welcome to CutOff Genes, the podcast that helps you find your truth using nothing but DNA. I'm Julie Dixon Jackson, and I'm a genetic genealogist, henceforth known as a Gen Genie.
And I am Richard Castle, the co-host and the producer of this podcast. How you doing, Julie?
I am well, and you, sir?
I'm doing okay. I'm having one of those technical snafu days where, like, the computer isn't working, and then the phone isn't working, and the internet's so I'm,
I hear you. Oh, how did your online musical go? What was it, virtual happy hour?
Virtual happy hour. It went really well, actually, better than I expected. It premiered on Sunday as a benefit for Theater Resources Unlimited, TRU. And there were a lot of people there. And then there were these, like an after party where there were breakout rooms for people to come and talk to us, the people who wrote it and the actors. And people loved it.
Was this the musical one? Because I know Nick Searley was in it, who I've done a show with.
And how do you
before.
know him? What show do you remember?
We did the workshop of The Last Smoker in America, written by Bill Russell.
Oh, wow.
In Ventura, like 10 years ago. But yeah, that was fun. It was me and Nick Searley and Alice Ripley.
Wow. Nick's a really nice guy, and I've only met him virtually, but he did a really nice job on the show. So, yeah, I'm really happy with the reception of it.
Yay! And can we watch it now? Is it streaming at all?
No, it is streaming, but it is streaming through today, and today is Thursday, and it will not be streaming anymore after that because of some Actors Equity Union rules.
Oh,
so,
I see.
By the time this comes out and people hear it.
Oh, but maybe I can check it out. Hey, I happened across the CBS show FBI this week that I don't watch.
Okay.
But it just happened to be at the end of the show, and they were talking about this guy, this suspect who they identified by DNA was in prison when this crime took place, and it couldn't have been him. How did it happen?
Ooh. And how did it happen? Spoiler alert.
Do you remember the Chimera extravaganza?
You'll have to remind me.
Okay, so if you get not a blood transfusion, if you get is it bone marrow?
A bone marrow transplant or something.
Yes, transplant. That you will forever carry part of their DNA as part of your DNA.
Yes, that's so fascinating.
Yes, but what's weird about it is only in certain places. Like his semen happened to have the other guy's DNA in it.
What luck.
Yay.
Right.
Yeah, but I was watching it and I'm like, oh, I could have told you that. If only I was on the case.
Right.
I would have figured it out long ago. And the guy that did it was this little unassuming, nebbishy guy that you would never think was a rapist.
It's always the one you least suspect.
It is. And it was revealed that he was indeed the suspect.
So you should be a consultant for these shows, Julie, because you could say, wait a minute. I know how this works.
Yes, I know. I do know how this works.
What I love is I watch old episodes of Columbo. They stream on Amazon Prime. And what I love about it is that it's not a whodunit. You know from the very beginning who has killed somebody. Like, you know who the perp is, but then it's up to Columbo to figure out how and to catch them. So
and the whole thing is about watching him figure it out.
Yes, yeah. It's so different from most of the who did it? We don't know.
Yeah. But you always know he's about to figure it out when he stops and turns around and says, one more thing.
I love that. I just love it. It's just so fun.
Peter Falk. Yes. Oh, I read this story on, I think it was a British newspaper. The story that basically the headline said, "Proof a father's love is blind. Georgina Lawton's parents were both white, yet her father never asked why she was black. Only after his death did her mother confess she was a result of a one-night stand." I'm like, well, that pretty much tells the whole story right there, doesn't
There's a good
it?
byline.
Yes, it's quite a long byline.
He never asked?
Well, okay, so yes, she asked, and other people.
Let me just wait. Walk me through this, Julie.
Yeah.
So these were two Caucasian people.
These were two Caucasian people in England who had a baby. And
who was clearly not fully Caucasian.
Right.
Okay.
Right. It says, yet Georgina was not the baby either of her parents had been expecting. They were both white, while she, with her tightly curled charcoal-colored hair and huge brown eyes, was unmistakably black.
And he didn't ask. That's the best part.
He didn't ask the mother. What is interesting is that he just always seemed overjoyed with his daughter and he and the mother says the two of them never discussed it.
Wow. I didn't even know what to make of that. Like what kind of marriage that would be where you would not discuss something like that.
You know what's interesting is I actually knew somebody like this to where we worked together like 25 years ago. And she was clearly a black girl or a half black girl. I mean, it's not for me to identify somebody else's race. I understand. But she was a black girl. She sang like a black girl. She looked like a black girl. She dated only black guys. And her parents were both white. And people asked her about it all the time. And and in hindsight, I'm like, well, God, it's nobody's business, is it? Why should we be asking her?
Well, I don't know that it's proper to ask somebody like, gee, you don't look like any of your parents. Are you adopted? Like, I don't think that's really an appropriate question. But I do think it's appropriate for the husband to ask, gee, honey,
yes. Well,
why is our baby black when we
right.
How did that happen? Maybe he could have asked if there was a recessive gene somewhere in her.
Well, that's where it went. It says, but while Jim embraced the new arrival, his wife Colette's mind was racing. Her relief at giving birth to a healthy girl was swiftly usurped by shame and trepidation. She knew straight away her baby was the result of a one-night stand she'd had with a barman in a pub in Shepherd's Bush exactly 9 months earlier. Yes, Shepherd's Bush.
Thank you for keeping me from having to say something about that, Julie.
I knew you were going to.
My mind was racing.
Yep. She told no one this secret, her guilt exacerbated by her strict Irish Catholic upbringing until after Jim's premature death at age 55.
Oh.
So meanwhile, a midwife throughout this child's life, a midwife threw the couple a lifeline that would anchor the story of the brown-skinned daughter into their solidly suburban Caucasian lives. The reason this beautiful baby was so different in complexion from her parents was doubtless down to a throwback gene, just like what you said, the recessive gene, from a distant lineage. She said, after all, wasn't Colette Irish? And hadn't there been lots of racial mixing on the West Coast where she was raised, close to a town called Spanish Point in County Clare? Could it be that crew from the ships dispersed by the Armada, Spanish and Portuguese sailors, had arrived there in the 16th century, had widened the gene pool? And now this is something that has been kind of a myth for years.
But we know, that the mother said she had a one-night stand.
Well, yes, but she just never told anybody. But this is what a local midwife said to them to give them an excuse.
I see. Okay.
Or for them and for the husband, I guess, to say, oh, that must be it, right? And this whole myth about the Spanish Armada and Spanish Point in County Clare is just that. It's preposterous.
Okay.
It's a fiction.
All right.
It's not a real thing. It's folklore. Yeah. And that was kind of what my friend that I worked with before, that's what she said too. She said it's a recessive gene. Mm-hmm. And, I've tried to look for her, because I would love to know where she is now.
Because at the time, you were not a DNA diva yet.
Yes. Right.
So you couldn't question
at the time, I was like, weird. Whereas now I'd be like, oh, let's look into this.
I guess there's something very sweet about the father raising the daughter as his own and loving her and all of that.
Well, it sounds like the father was a real mensch.
Yeah.
Because she wrote a book about this.
The daughter did?
Yes. So the father died when he was 55, But up until his death, he was a wonderful father. And the book she wrote was about this, but it was also honoring how amazing her father was.
That's really sweet.
Yes, exactly. But still, I mean, she lived in a very white area. And as a child, this was torture for her. A teacher once questioned her publicly on why her ethnicity was marked as white British on the school's records.
Oh, yeah.
The teacher and she said, both my parents are white. That's all I know. And the teacher said, but that doesn't make you white, does it? Do you think there's some mistake at the hospital where you were born? Why would you put these thoughts into this child's head?
Yeah, and it's
as an adult.
It was none of the teacher's business, right?
Yes, exactly. In fact, the mother called her a nosy old cow.
You gotta love the British.
You gotta love them.
You know?
Just to the point.
Shepherd's bush to lazy old cow or whatever. Nosy old cow.
Nosy old cow. Nosy old cow. So he died in 2015, and Georgina had collected his DNA before he died, but she didn't send it in. She thought it would be disloyal if she were to send it in while he was still living. But she did, and after he passed, and it basically said there is no chance this man is your father. So she went to her mother and said, look, we got to talk about how this happened. And the mother at first said, I don't know, I don't understand myself. It must be a mistake, which is usually what MPE mothers say at first. Finally, she opened up and told them about the dude in Shepherd's Bush, and but that's all she knew. Right. She knew that he was a black guy, and she didn't know his name or anything else. So, she did a DNA test, but then she did an ethnicity test, and she was, she was 43% of her ancestry originated in Nigeria, but she never got another response. And what's interesting is she's written the book about this, but she has never gone any further to actually find her father.
Really? That's the next book.
Yeah. That's probably the next book. That was probably a really smart thing. In fact, her publisher probably told her not to do that yet.
Because, if her father, the father that raised her died in 2015 at such a young age, you can imagine that the man, her birth father, is probably still alive. Or it could very well be.
Oh, most likely. And by the way, the mother said he was a barman in Shepherd's Bush, meaning he worked as a bartender in Shepherd's Bush. It wouldn't be that difficult to go to that bar and say, who are your barmen?
Yeah, right.
During this, this time. Of course, I think she should just take a DNA test, but whatever.
Yeah, this sort of reminds me of that article I sent you about a week ago by our former guest, Libby Copeland. It was a New York Times op-ed, and it was called America's Brutal Racial History is Written All Over Our Genes. Our country has struggled to reckon with the horrors of the past. Could DNA tests help? And it just talked about how we self-identify as a certain race or whatever, but the DNA tells a different story, and that the races have been mixing for generations, and especially because of and due to slavery. And
absolutely. And it's so funny because it was such kind of like a novelty almost. That
Thomas Jefferson?
Yes, Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings. Like that's kind of like a novelty story.
Right.
Like, well, he actually married one of his slaves or had a relationship with her and they loved each other. When in actuality, that is the most common way that that explains the reason why most African Americans now can trace European DNA in their genealogy.
Well, I'll just read this little bit from it because I think it's relevant. If this is from Libby Copeland's op-ed piece, which is really fantastic if you want to look it up, folks. It says a 23andMe study from 2015 revealed that close to 4% of the company's customers who identified as white Americans had at least 1% African ancestry. Okay, and it said that according to the old notorious, quote, one-drop rule of the Jim Crow era, meaning if you had one drop of African American blood, you would have been considered legally black.
And less than, by the way.
So it's fascinating how what we self-identify as versus what is really in our genes. And maybe if we knew about it, would that make a difference? I mean, that's sort of what the article is asking.
But knowing about it means you care.
Yeah.
Knowing about it means that you have a curiosity. And there are a lot of people out there who would rather live in ignorance.
Oh, yeah. Oh, for sure.
You know. Anyway, so this book is called Raceless: In Search of Family, Identity, and the Truth About Where I Belong by Georgina Lawton. And I think we should take a break.
Let's do that. If you're enjoying our podcast, please subscribe, rate, and review. Or consider supporting us on our Patreon page, patreon.com/CutOff Genes Podcast. Now back to Julie and me.
All right, we're back.
Hello.
Hi. I have a story from the trenches that actually is from the last couple of days. Now, this is one of those cases when you get it, you're like, I don't know. I barely even have to think about this one because there were so many close matches, and the highest being so high that it only could have been one of three things, which was a half-sibling, an aunt, or a grandmother. That's how high it was. Because once the higher it gets, the fewer possibilities there could be. And she was over 1,000 centimorgans. Actually, she was like almost 2,000 centimorgans. So she can only be a half sibling, aunt, or grandmother. Clearly, she was born in 1946. She must be a grandmother. Now, the story was that the client was born in Salt Lake City to a teenager who had little to no prenatal care. So it was, one of those things. But she was 15 or 16, something like that.
Okay.
And so I'm like, well, if that's the grandmother, it must be one of her daughters. So I begin building out on this side. Well, first of all, I figured out very quickly who the father was because once I identified both of the grandparents on the paternal side, there were 4 sons, one of which was a match. So we knew that has to be one of the other 3. So that I could set aside. I was comfortable with that. On this side, as I built out her tree, yes, I could see there was another grandchild in there, and there were some cousins on her on both her mother's and father's side, the grandmother. What I did discover, though, was that I could not connect by DNA anyone from her husband's side. Meaning who should be the grandfather of my client.
Right.
If she's the grandmother. But I couldn't connect them. And I knew that he had been married before. The grandmother had not been married before. I knew there were several kids, some from his previous marriage. I didn't know at this point which ones. Obviously, this was a second marriage for him. So, again, I couldn't, where did this baby come from? So I then, luckily, there was another line that had just as high a matches, and that wasn't the paternal line because I'd already identified that. Now, all of a sudden, I'm like, oh no, we're in an NPE situation.
Okay.
Which can go very bad very fast. Because if all I'm going to know is it's an NPE situation, but if there are no trees and nobody will talk to me to give me factual information about their biological family tree so that I can figure it out, there's nothing I'm going to be able to do.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
So luckily, one of the highest matches, who was a first cousin, or first cousin once removed, was talking to my client, and she agreed to talk to me and just gave me. And here's the thing. I've said this before, but I want to reiterate because people don't quite get it. When I talk to somebody, when I want somebody to help me to identify somebody that was in their family, I don't want them to reveal any secrets from the family. I don't want them to try to figure out for themselves who it might be.
I see.
So they don't feel like all I want to know is who their grandparents are. I want to know who all 4 of their biological grandparents are, and that's all they need to tell me.
That's interesting. You're trying to relieve them of the burden of like.
Well, and it's not even that I'm trying to. I don't need to know who they think it might be, unless they have some important information, but most people don't. But all I need to know is the facts about who they are genetically connected to if they are a match, because that will lead me in the right direction.
Right.
And so sure enough, she told me who her mother was a match on there, and her sister was on a match on there, and then a child of her grandfather's sibling was a match on there. So we know it went up through the grandfather. And then as I was talking to her, I knew her grandmother's name as well, and I couldn't find anybody that connected with the grandmother with that name. And so I asked her, how many matches do you have? Do you have any matches that when you type in the name of the surname of your grandmother come up that are connected? And she did. And
good.
I didn't. So I was then able to figure out that that woman's grandfather had a baby with the grandmother in the DNA. So these 2 completely separate families who had no connection on paper at all, I figured out the connection.
Wow.
To an affair.
Julie is on the case. Nothing can remain hidden.
So it was such a relief, though, because I'm like, oh, no. I mean, I knew what it was, but I'm like, how am I going to figure it out? The breakthrough was figuring out matches on one side, but not to his wife, and matches on the other side, but not to her husband. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So basically the child, which was probably the first child born into this marriage, which she was already conceived right around the time she got married.
Okay.
And she is not the daughter of who she thinks is her father. So the mother of my client is herself an NPE. And I actually spoke to the grandmother yesterday before I figured this out. And she had returned my call without realizing what call she was returning, I think, because she works for a company. And so she called me back saying, this is from so and such a company. I'm like, really? I'm like, are you in Utah? And she said, yeah. I said, oh, is your name blah, blah? She said, yeah. I'm like, oh, so you're blah, 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 blah.
So she thought she was making a business call, but you're
yes.
like calling her to say, I'm here to remind you about the affair you had 30 years ago.
Well, and the thing is, though, I didn't know about the affair at that point. But she also denied her married name. She said, no, I'm from this and this line, which were her parents' lines. But I said, but aren't you a blah, blah, which is her married name? And she said no. And then she hung up on me. So I'm thinking, so I don't know. She obviously knew at that point I was doing some DNA stuff. And maybe she was just like, I don't want any part of this. I want to take this secret to my grave.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So by the end of the day, I'd figured out who the mother is. And because I believe she only had one daughter in that marriage. And so I figured it out. And here's the thing. Unless anybody specifically asks about it, if it all comes to the surface that, yes, she was his biological mother and, it's not my job to out this secret that has nothing to do with
your client.
Yes.
Like your client asked you about one relationship, right? Like one specific, to find this one specific relationship.
I mean, he knows what happened. He knows the story.
Right.
But in order to, I think the grandmother may be resistant because she thinks that
That another secret will come out. Yes.
Right,
Yeah.
which I have no intention of doing unless,
Right.
because I don't think if his daughter is an NPE, if her daughter is an NPE, which she does have a right to know about, but that was not the question
Right.
at hand.
Right. They can hire you to find that relationship, and then you can let them know. Right. In other words,
Right.
somebody has to be asking about that specific, NPE situation.
Right, for me to do that to that
Yeah.
family because I
Right.
know she was close to her father, and it's weird because, I come from a place of truth and truth always being the most important thing. But if nobody was specifically seeking out that particular truth, I don't think it's my place to just volunteer it.
No,
I guess.
it's. I totally agree with you. I
Yeah.
completely agree. Like, again, if someone asks, then you can tell them. But it's not your job to fill in every little secret that they have in
Right.
there. If just because somebody said, "Could you tell me who my parent was?"
Right, right, exactly. By the way,
Yeah. Did you know that this?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, if she actually says, so who matches on my father's side?
Right.
In which case I'd be like, nobody.
You're like, well, we could go down that path as well.
Yeah, if you would like to talk about that, I don't know, but yeah. Anyway, so I'm hoping this, fingers crossed, it all works out.
What a fascinating business you're in, Julie.
It is
Well, why don't we ponder that on a break?
very good.
Thank you for listening to Cut Off Jeans with Julie Dixon Jackson and Richard Castle. You can support us by going to patreon.com/Cut Off Jeans podcast. Now, back to the program.
All right, we're back, and it is time for part 4, the finale of Jessica Stavena's epic odyssey
It is an epic odyssey.
of fertility fraud.
Where were we last week when we left off, Julie?
Last week when we left off, I think they had just discovered a 6th or 7th sibling, half sibling. The most recent siblings who were uncovered had no idea they were even donor conceived, so it was kind of a double whammy for them. And as we get towards the end of the story for now, because it's ongoing in the courts, we're going to hear a little more about how this has affected Jessica emotionally for her and for her mother, who is really the ultimate victim of this fraud.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yep.
And isn't the doctor still practicing?
He is still practicing when last we spoke.
How does that happen?
I don't know.
Well, let's listen and find out.
Okay.
We're all from these little teeny tiny small towns. So it's like you've got this little teeny tiny pond with little sub ponds inside of it.
Mm-hmm.
So we're all just, 5-10 minutes away from each other. I mean, we're literally from all these small towns that are all next to each other. Teeny tiny towns of people that do not leave.
Right.
People don't leave East Texas. Most people don't leave East Texas. There's an exception. There are some people, and some of us did leave East Texas, thankfully, because I probably would have ended up with a sibling by the direction we're going. So
yeah, there's that whole aspect of it. What if you end up dating your sibling? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and so several of our siblings went to college together, went to high school together, have kids in the same schools, the same ages. There's just been a lot of very close encounters, just teasing this apart. But this newest brother that his results came in December, he had no idea he was donor conceived, and he actually just was like floored. This is the scenario,
Yeah. It's so shocking. And now you guys are in a position to where you're just like waiting for new ones to come in, and you're going to be an expert at breaking it to them gently. You know what I mean? Because
exactly.
it's just going to keep happening probably.
Oh, it will. And it is. And yesterday we had another sister.
Did she know she was donor conceived?
She had no idea at all. You know what? So my one half sister that I originally had connected with, she has to remain anonymous because she still lives there, works in the town, is in the medical community with our biological father.
Ugh.
She was a patient of our father. She was seeing him. He was her gynecologist for years. So he did vaginal and breast exams on her for years.
Oh my God.
Our newest sister delivered both of her children, and he is her gynecologist.
Oh my God.
Her children are old enough that she's probably been a patient of his for at least 15 years, I would say, 12 to 15.
Oh, this just keeps getting weirder and weirder. He needs his license pulled. And he needs to answer for himself. That's crazy. What does it do for you? Does it mess with you knowing that your father is such a narcissist?
It does. So prior to finding all this out, it's like before COVID life, after COVID life,
right.
Before finding out that I was, that my mother's fertility doctor is my father, before finding that out, I have always been a very energetic, happy, excited, just fun, silly person, just all the time. And when this happened, I felt like someone blew that candle out or a fuse was blown and that light, will never shine again. Like there's so much, and a lot of it is for my mom, because my mom, she had a traumatic upbringing as a child through adulthood, and then being in the abusive marriage. The trauma just continues for her. And now this, then discovering that you, as a female, just going to your gynecologist, it is a very vulnerable moment. You are undressed, probably naked with a paper gown, right? Or you're undressed from the waist down.
Yeah.
Your legs are up, stirrups, your hoo-ha is wide open in their face, right?
Yeah.
Like this is, and I feel like it's really important to be paint a very clear picture of this whole thing, because I think a lot of people don't understand.
Right. How abusive that all is, how abusive that this power control is. To just be seeing your gynecologist just for your annual well woman, right? To get your pap smear. That's a very vulnerable situation. It's a very uncomfortable, but you're like, okay, I trust this doctor. This is, you have this trust and this bond, right? Right.
But then to be going through fertility treatment, this is a whole nother level of different mindset okay, I feel broken because I can't produce a child. There's something wrong with me. What is wrong with me? I am broken. Something is wrong. It's the blame game, right?
Yeah.
And you're psychologically, you're just like, please help me. Like, I want a baby. Like, and you put all of your trust, 100% of you, into this person. You're like, this person is going to make it happen. And you trust that they're going to do it an ethical way, right? They're going to do it safely. They're going to do no harm.
They took an oath, right?
And so so now you're at this point where you're already vulnerable because you're at your gynecologist, but now you're even more vulnerable because you're putting everything you have into this person to help create a human life. Mm-hmm. Not just growing a plant to put in your backyard, this is a human life that you're creating, and you're putting your to do this.
Yeah.
And so, and then going through these treatments, there's a lot of things that you're doing. You're taking certain things, you're doing certain shots, you're calling as soon as your temperature is a certain whatever, and the ovulation stick says you're ovulating, and you drop everything and you drive 30 minutes to the doctor, and you then, you go get your, pelvic floor prepped and everything ready to go for this procedure in hopes that you're going to have a baby. This is going to be it. This is going to be, it's a lot.
Yeah.
The rug was pulled underneath you, that he was going in the next room and masturbating and then coming in. Fresh sperm only lives outside the body for 30 minutes max.
Wow.
It's mind blowing. And so my mom replaying this scenario over and over again in her head, like, I'm in the room praying to God that this is going to work.
Yeah.
And who is he to decide that he's going to be my father, that he's going to be the father of her child?
Oh, he's literally playing God. I mean, it's so,
it's awful.
Yeah, it's awful.
It's just sickening. So a lot of my psychological, I feel like, trauma and the emotional aspect of it for me is not even for me. I don't even think I've dipped into that for me. I just have like peeled back just a little bit of it. It's for my mom. And that's why I filed that complaint with the Texas Medical Board. That's why I testified against him. And whenever we had that ISC hearing, that was the very first time I laid eyes on him and physically saw him versus like, you know,
Pictures.
a Google image, right?
Yeah.
And so to have that as that first moment where I get to see my biological father, it just
is when you're
was
testifying against him, right?
It was not what I had hoped of and I had dreamed of. And I always thought, you know, I knew my biological father was a doctor because Dr. McMorris told my mom on the last insemination when she actually had a successful pregnancy. He said that he could get a donor who was a medical resident from the hospital. And my mom refused. She said, I don't want that because, you know, this is a small town. Like, I don't want my daughter to grow up and end up marrying or my child at the time. Obviously, you don't know what you're having. I don't want my child to grow up and marry siblings. And, you know, I don't want that. I want a donor from California Cryobank based on the Cryobank catalog that she had picked from.
Right.
When he finally convinced her, saying, you know, he's not here. He's only doing his residency. So he's going to go and move away. And, you know, you won't have to worry about that. And basically this was the only time he was going to get a donation from this medical resident. So he painted this picture that he was like, you know, 6'5", 6'6", or, you know, redheaded, loved music. He was a medical resident, very intelligent. So my mom finally agreed. And so I knew because she told me that story. She painted that picture for me based on what he told her. So I always knew that he was a doctor because he was a medical resident at the time, right? So I always knew my father was a doctor. And to kind of go on that, further research has confirmed that the hospital was never a teaching hospital. Therefore, there have never been medical residents. So these are just more lie after lie after lie.
Yeah. It's amazing. It's amazing the level of narcissism and selfishness, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yep. And I play this over in my head. And I think the reason he came up with this lie is that that this donor is a medical resident. I think he was trying to justify it in his head because at one point he was a medical resident.
Oh, right. So it wasn't really a lie because he was a medical resident.
Yeah. And at one point he did donate, or at some point or several times he did donate when he was in residency, you know, so in his mind, I think he was trying to justify what he was saying. It's, I'm not really lying because I was a medical resident. And so I feel like that, and this is just me trying to break the whole process down in my head, like, you know, of the whole thing. And he actually told Eve that he went back to UTMB Galveston and purchased his old samples from the 70s and brought them back to his practice to use on patients.
All right.
First of all, you can't purchase your semen after you've donated it. And it's just like if you go give blood, you can't be like, oh, you know what? Actually, I'm going to buy that back.
That makes no sense.
Yeah. And so that just shows a whole nother level of narcissistic like behavior with him, is that he used that lie.
Yeah.
You know,
well, just the willful lying is enough, I would think, to get him to get his license revoked. I mean, that's amazing. Just out of curiosity, have you watched Baby God on HBO?
So honestly, I have not yet. When it launched, I went to watch it, to purchase it on HBO or whatever, or Amazon. And I just backed out of doing it because I just didn't know what kind of doors that was going to open. Like,
I get it.
From a psychological standpoint. And so I'm like, I just don't know if I'm ready to kind of.
Yeah, no, I get it.
I don't know.
I absolutely get it. It would. I could see it being very triggering.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize that your story was so recent and was still so active.
Oh yeah, we're at 9 illegitimate offspring, and he has 3 social children. So currently we have 12 siblings. His 3 children, you know, obviously don't have any contact with us. The oldest one is in practice with him currently. And so, he's eyeballs deep in it.
Yeah,
unfortunately.
Wow. That's incredible. So you mentioned there was a 2020 story.
Yes, I can I can send you the link so that way you can post it.
Awesome.
And then they did a follow-up on it with Eve and I right before Thanksgiving. So I'll send you that link as well.
How did I miss that?
And then it was right before Thanksgiving.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's in the midst of all the holiday stuff, but I'll send you both links so that way that you can take a peek and you can post those like.
Yeah, so, I will. I'll hold on to them until the episodes what you're talking about, or because I don't want to give it away.
Yeah.
But okay. Wow, Jessica, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being so vulnerable and really taking action.
I really, really appreciate it. I mean,
yeah,
it's just. Of course, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's just so many layers deeper than this that every part of this goes. And, Eve and I are going to pursue legislation probably in February or towards the end of this month to get stricter guidelines on the fertility industry.
Absolutely. It has to be regulated. It has to.
So we definitely think that, that there should be much stricter guidelines on the fertility industry. And it's just mind blowing.
It is. And I'm so glad I'm so glad you're using this for good and to make changes. And I think that's also going to be a healthy way to point you towards healing,
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, if you don't put a purpose I don't think you'll ever truly, and not that I think any of us will ever heal, or anyone in the same or similar boat will ever heal from this whole thing. But I think it's number one, it's therapeutic to talk about it, just to okay, like kind of out a bit. Yeah. But if we can help one more person, if we can protect one more person from this happening to them, then it's all worth it, right?
Yep, so, absolutely. And I agree with you 100% that if you the best way to begin to recover from trauma is to turn it into a positive, and that's basically my motto in life.
Yep.
All right. Well, Jessica Stavena, thank you so much. This has been enlightening and fascinating and thoroughly enjoyable. And please keep me posted, or keep us posted.
And thank you so much for having me. It really means the world that you're, helping our story get told. And, as bad as I don't want to find any more siblings, because I don't want any more worlds, any more lives disrupted. Yeah. But the health aspect, all the health issues that run down this line are so incredibly important that our siblings, if there are more out there, which we know there are, that they know that medical information. Thank you so much for having me, Julie. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, Jessica. Great talking to her. Great story.
Wow.
And Jessica's going to keep us posted. And also, I'm going to, I guess, put a link to that 2020 story in the group, if I can get it from her, so that everybody can watch it.
Okay? Oh, that's a good idea. Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Jessica, for sharing that story with us. It's fascinating. It really was fascinating. I am Richard Castle, and when I am not on a podcast, and in normal times, I am a musician and a composer and a songwriter and a playwright. And you can find out all about me at richardcastle.com, or you could follow me on Instagram or Twitter at Castle Songs.
I'm Julie Dixon Jackson. You can find me on the Twitter at Jules Jackson with 2 O's. Find the podcast on Twitter at CutOff Jeans Pod. Join the Facebook group. Send me an email, jules.jackson@cutoffjeans.com. And as I always say,
what is that, Julie?
The truth is in your jeans.